What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
Hi everyone, this is Matt Ardill, the co-producer of the Comedy Album Book Club. Sorry if you were expecting the dulcet tones of Jason DeLine. He let me have a go at the mic today. 3 weeks ago, we recorded our episode talking about Force Majeure by Eddie Izzard, and a couple of days later, I had the pleasure of sitting down with our guest Adam Bailey to talk about comedy, compassion, sex, and politics. Since that interview, a lot has happened in the world, including the world of comedy. One of the happier things to happen in the world of comedy is the addition of Adam's play The ABCs of Love with Adult Baby Cupid to the Toronto Fringe Festival, running from July 5th to July 15th, followed closely by the Hamilton Fringe Festival from July 19th to July 29th. So, if you're in the Hamilton or Toronto area, do yourself a favor and check out those shows. If you enjoy this podcast, please give us 5 stars and leave us a review. Sit back and enjoy our conversation with playwright Adam Bailey. Thanks for joining me. I'm sitting with Adam Bailey, a Fringe and Now magazine award-winning director, playwright, actor, and comedian, as well as a heck of a cabaret performer and dancer. You started 2 production companies, Royal Porcupine Productions, as well as Still Your Friend Productions. Directed works by William Shakespeare and plays like Terrorism, The Enchanted Crack House, in addition to writing your own works like The Assassination of Robert Ford, Dirty Little Coward, Adam Bailey is on Fire, and The Life of Henry. It's been like over 10 years that we've known each other now. It's kind of scary that kind of sneaks up on you.
Yeah.
We met during working on the Shameless Stains.
A company that I produced. I didn't create though. It was that was a fun doing agitprop comedy without our clothes on, and lots of boobies, lots of women with their boobs showing. And
I mean, at the time, there's sort of like the boom of burlesque in Toronto, but not many of them had a political manifesto like the Dames did.
Yeah, and I don't know if we purposely did that or that was just our sense of humor. We were all leftist enough that we all just like coalesced around the same sort of ideas. And there was a very anti-Bush, and like we were all terrified of America becoming an empire at that moment in time. And certainly
how naive we were that 10 years later it's really happening.
Oh, or it's just it's crumbling now. It could be in its decadent phase.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, if I had to think of a Roman emperor, Nero, that would be a good fit for Trump.
What instrument will he play when it burns?
I don't want to say that on a family podcast.
I didn't know this was a family podcast. I'll keep all the swearing to myself.
No, it's okay. So we like to ask what your favorite comedy album was and how it shaped your work.
Oh, wow. My favorite comedy album. I mean, I grew up in an evangelical household, so we had all these Mike Warnke comedy albums who I actually was taken to. I think that might have been one of my first live comedy shows, too, was this. For the evangelical set, like, he was our stand-up comedian, okay. And he had a series of hit albums within the Christian entertainment community, and so he would probably be one of the more influential things because I was allowed to listen to him, because I wasn't allowed to listen to a lot of other things growing up, and so definitely that put me on the march towards being funny. What was Mike Warnke? I didn't think I'd be saying his name today, but yeah, him.
So I mean, he obviously worked in sort of Christian and family friendly themes. But like, what kind of style was it? Like
high energy, observational. Like I'm a big fan of like Lewis Black now, and I can kind of draw a direct line between like Mike Warnke and him, where he'd be like patter, 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 and then like an outburst of like raw emotion and like high energy.
So it's sort of like, you know, if you take George Carlin, and then you fork off one direction becoming ultra Christian, the other direction becoming like ultra fuck the establishment. That would sort of be Lewis Black and the fuck the establishment,
and Mike Warnke, this very niche comedian who did that sort of thing. Like, he had long hair, and he had this entire set about how, you know, Christians would come up to him and say, you can't have long hair, it's an effeminate hairstyle, and the Bible's against that. And of course his long hair was like scraggly, middle-aged douche guy long hair. He'd be like, this is a feminine hairstyle, and he would like really get like off like, what sort of woman looks like this? And he was like kind of like a fat hairy guy, so like with a beard, so it kind of made sense, like those sorts of observational things. Even the most oppressive religious folks needs to laugh every once in a while.
It's true. But I mean, thinking about it, you know, the observational element has played a lot in your plays, like, and your humor. Like, not necessarily to the point of strictly calling it out, but there's, when I think about your plays, I think a lot of the times it's very astute sort of character studies and honing in on these details about the people and the places involved in them, where you really draw out these facts and pull out the absurdities of situations and people.
Well, I mean, I think in some ways, another person that I compare myself to, oh my goodness, I'm going to compare myself to the top, Steve Martin, because I think when you talk about the stuff that I write that is more theatrical, even though it is also comedy, that takes me forever to write. Like, my writing process is very detailed oriented, and I really focus on things. But I also have my MC persona when I'm cabareting or when I'm doing comedy nights, where I'm often just riffing off of what's happening in the room and around me. Like, if I'm hosting as an MC, I might have, I'll start off with a strong 5 minutes to like get the evening going, but between the acts I'll start drawing threads between the different comedians and stuff, and I feel like that zany v brainy, zany meets brainy, that's me. And Steve Martin, I'm your lost child, Steve Martin, give me a call.
now like, speaking of that, you've done a lot of different like genres and types of plays. So you've done like one-man shows, you've done shows with like full casts, and you've written alone and in groups. So how's the process like writing comedy and writing theater alone versus writing comedy or theater in general with a group, with like a writing room kind of situation?
Oh wow, it all depends on deadlines. I mean, like when I was working with the Shameless Dames, we had to turn our shows around in 8 weeks, right? Like, and those were full burlesque musicals. Like, we had song and dance numbers to learn and rehearse, and we had people with their own burlesque solos, and we had scripted sketch comedy bits, and so that would happen really fast because we were driving towards a goal that just sort of like SNL. It didn't matter. You didn't put the show on because it was ready. You put the show on because your dates came up, right? Like, and you just had to be ready whenever that was. Meanwhile, I'm writing something for Adult Baby Cupid right now. I'm not writing it. It's done being written now. And I wrote that with a partner. Mm-hmm. And that was as long as anything else I've written on my own. Just because we wanted to get it right. Like, there was a real drive to make sure that what we put on stage, because we were dealing with really hot topics, was being done in a way that was smart and funny.
So, speaking of Adult Baby Cupid, you just did a read of your latest play, The ABCs of Love with Adult Baby Cupid?
Yes, The ABCs of Love with Adult Baby Cupid.
At the Toronto Festival of Clowns.
Yeah.
So, now, I mean, we've talked about this before. You had a play done. You had something done, and then Me Too happened. And it meant you had to totally retool that. So can you tell me maybe a bit about Adult Baby Cupid and how Me Too reshaped that? And do you think it's a more interesting play because of that?
It's a 10 times better play because of it. We have something with real thought in it, and like people are going to be unpacking what's in it for hopefully weeks after they see the show. At the same time, it's goofy, dumb humor. Like it's like some of the humor is like is bonkers and stupid, and just like Adult Baby Cupid is a character I created for the Lunacy Cabaret as a hosting conceit for like. They had shows that were falling on Valentine's weekend, and they just wanted an appropriate host for that. So I did this man in a diaper who spoke in a baby voice. Hello, I'm Cupid. I'm a little baby, and he would talk like that. And he gives love advice, except his love advice is outdated and wrong. And the ABCs of love, we were going into it with these are the questions that people are asking about love right now, and even. We were writing it even as Harvey Weinstein happened, and that was fine. That wasn't affecting us. What changed it was Izzy and Zari, because that bad date changed all the questions that people were asking about what's appropriate in relationships now. And the same way, like season 2 of Kimmy Schmidt feels like it was written for a world that never existed.
Yeah.
The script that we had was fine. It was funny, but it just felt like it was humor for a parallel universe. And so
didn't realize we were going to go into the darkest of timelines.
Yeah. So we are doing an advice column show about a struggling artist who's hired by the god of love, Adult Baby Cupid, and in the world of the play, it is something that we've been touring across Canada and have been protested in every single city we go to by a different group. So it's just about how there is no right answer to anything at this moment, that you will always set off an extremist. And the entire show just really sits in this really uncomfortable place because Cupid tends to put you in really uncomfortable places. Were you at the show where I did the condom gag with him?
No.
Yeah, like this sort of character that he is the sort of character he came out because he hates birth control because he wants you to have babies. That's the whole purpose of falling in love. And so he came out after having discovered a used condom in the theater washroom, very upset about it. And in true clown form, the minute someone laughed at him, I fixated on that person, and Cupid would go up to the person and start shoving the used condom in their face. No. And the second that person's buddy laughed at him for that, it was like, oh, this is your condom then. And it shoved it in their face until I went all the way down row and ended up dropping it in someone's drink and then chugging their beer on them on stage. Cupid can do really big and wild things. He's a very big and wild character. So
now, your play ABC's Love with Adult Baby Cupid was reshaped by Me Too. Now, how do you think obviously with Louis C.K. and other performers like Aziz Ansari, how Me Too is affecting them, but how do you think it's affecting the dynamic of actually telling a joke and how the comedy that's coming out? Because you look at people like Michelle Wolf or there's a lot more attention being paid, I think, to creators who are calling out these inequities in a much more brash way. Do you think that's something that was happening anyways, or do you think Me Too maybe helped accelerate that?
Well, I mean, I think it's definitely the voice of the moment is not the white male voice. It's that very interesting that I am having this play at this moment. But I think it's helping people like Michelle Wolf and Samantha Bee and Aisha Brown and people getting their name out there and being the voice of the moment, because that's the voices that a lot of people want to hear. At the same time, it is dividing the market a bit. There are shows like White Guys Matter happening at Yuck Yucks, and people are being infuriated by the existence of that show, and what does that mean? But there are people who are still craving to see themselves There are white people who want to see themselves represented in comedy, and they feel like they're not getting a chance right now.
Like 99% of the market that we dominate.
I've got 99 problems, but that 1% of time I'm not represented ain't one. I think because the subject matter is so driven to one side, like the need the voice we need to hear is so female and not white. And I think it's really helping those comedians have a moment right now that in an odd way.
Now, you did debut this play at the Toronto Festival of Clowns.
Woo-hoo.
So, can you tell me a bit about that? It's the 13th year that the festival has gone on. What are some of the favorite acts that you saw during that? What's the festival itself about?
Okay, so the Festival of Clowns in Toronto is a festival of comedy, of physical comedy, of no fourth wall theater bits. It's designed to help bridge people doing physical comedy turns, whether it's red nose or like other styles of clowning, Buffon, like Mr. Beanie type stuff, and help them develop their stuff so they can get to an hour-long show. Because there's not a lot of space that's focused strictly on people creating those sorts of works. Now, in the festival this year, we had some really interesting bits. We had Candace Bernhardt doing Get Lucky, which I believe she's touring across the country. We had Travis Bernhardt. I think I gave Candy his last name for some reason. They're married now. Travis and Candy, you're married. And he did a show called Unscriptured, which is a show where he improvs a church with the entire audience, which is one I saw it last year in the Edmonton Fringe, and it's mind-blowingly good. We always do triple bills, and we had lots of cabarets. This was our first year doing a clown burlesque cabaret because there's an entire community of the clown fear has gone away. There's now instead the people with the clown phobia are giving way to people who have like a clownophilia. Like there's a real kink thing happening with clowns right now, which is really interesting to watch. I mean, there's lots of good stuff out there for people who are interested in that. I know the Fringe in Toronto is coming up, and the Merkin Sisters is an act that's touring that I love, that does a lot of really wild, physical, Jim Henson-esque clown comedy with their bodies, and they do full body puppetry. We have Moro and Jasp, who are in the festival, and they also have a show coming up in the Fringe called Save the Date. So yeah, there's lots of amazing things and that are out there in the physical comedy world. It's just giving them a space to develop is what the TFOC is about.
Now, you'd mentioned there's different styles of clowning, like Buffon. Now, looking at acts like Stephen Colbert or Zach Galifianakis, who like literally has a show about being a clown, but even outside of buckets, is watching their work. It's there is that physical element. There is that sort of character development that seems common with like Mr. Bean or these other extreme clowny characters. So, how do you feel that comedy is a snobby world? So
no, people say that and they make it happen. But I've been welcome as someone who crosses over from theater to comedy to clown, who's done cabarets. I've never run a room or been in a room where I've been made to feel so much like an oddball. I know other people experience that and it sucks, but you have to push through. And if you do, if you're confident in, hey, I'm doing this mixed bag of things, and if you own it, I think the snobbery goes away.
And like, do you feel clowning informs stand-up, or there's like a feedback loop there to a certain extent?
Clowning and stand-up. I mean, I think if you go to a Just for Laughs type festival, there are people who definitely have done clown work at that. I know Just for Laughs bills itself as a comedy, capital C comedy festival, but it tends to be a stand-up festival, mostly. I think anytime you get the musical acts, there's a bit of clown that influences how the people who do musical comedy work. Large scale improv. Steve Martin is definitely a clown. He does a lot of clowning in his work.
You can almost say like the magician in him. Like a magician and clown and all that sort of draw from the same source of engaging the audience in a different way.
Well, and drag. Any drag queen who does comedy, not pageant, is a clown. Because that's using the mask to create a character and then interacting with the audience in an honest, in the moment, like right now kind of way. Yeah. So I think, Bob the drag queen is certainly a clown. Like, Miss Cracker, probably a clown. So I think those people are clowns. It's just the people who make their money in comedy who have clown training sometimes are sneaky about how they label themselves, because they know that there's like this horror clown thing out there that they don't want to be associated with. And so even if their entire routine is based off a clown they developed, they might not use that term when they're selling themselves. Yeah.
Well, I mean, when people think clown, they think Ringling Brothers. They don't think all these this history of the art form being used in all these different ways.
Well, and if this podcast gets heard on the West Coast, I'm going to say that there's going to be some people on the West Coast who will say no, because right now there's a real movement on the West Coast with physical comedy and clowning that's creating like really full shows that are quite hysterical. There's one company called A Little Bit Off that does new shows every year, and they're fantastic. They do a lot of play in their work, and then they drive people to the theater. There's another show that I saw last year called You Fucking Earned It, which is all about American excess, and it's dark and funny at the same time. I left the theater and said, my favorite part of that show was the rape, which is not something you normally say when you see a show. But they summarily sold out houses with 1-star reviews and won an Artist Appreciation Award at the festival that I saw them in. Like, so there's I think it depends on where you are. That is.
It's like, there's a New York comedy scene and an LA comedy scene. They're very different, and when you hear an LA comic, there's an LA comic voice. When you hear a New York comic, there's a New York comic voice, and then you have the people who sort of go back and forth.
Now, if they start mixing with the hip hop scene, so like you have your West Coast comics and your West Coast rappers like running in posses together now, because that would be
interesting.
I want to see that happen. America, you fuck the world over with your presidential choice. Start blending your comedy and your rappers together. I think that is what the world needs now.
That's a good one. Now, we recently did an episode where you were on the panel where we discussed Eddie Izzard's album Force Majeure. I hope I got that right, Jason.
I think it's Eddie Ozarks.
Oh, okay. Izzard?
Gizzards.
But, he's a transvestite comedian. He's made his transvestitism a part of his act for decades, but in a very matter-of-fact way. Like, he'll mention it, especially in the early episodes, where he discusses, like, his action transvestite persona, or business transvestite. But do you think... Because in a lot of ways, other than that, he's kind of he's straight. His humor plays straight. Like, so do you think in some ways that opened the doors, or for other LGBTQ plus acts, or do you think it sort of held it back, or like how do you think his work informed queer comedy?
A door is a door. I think him going through the door makes the door a bit wider. It expands the idea of what it is. I mean, we might have too many letters in our acronym now in the 2S LGBTQ world, but I think it's good that a person who identified publicly that way did that.
Now, right now in comedy, it feels like it's more inclusive than it has ever been. Because, I mean, we have acts like James Adomian, Rhea Butcher, Cameron Esposito, Todd Glass, Tig Notaro, Canadian local comedians like Rick Mercer and Deanne Smith, who are all queer identifying, sharing their unique experiences. So do you think now do you think the comedy world is finally being more embracing of different voices than it has previously?
I think the fight is being won by women and people of color right now. I think for queer comedy, I think one of the reasons why I have to blend into so many scenes is it's a different battle. Because you're kind of on the face of it being contrarian. You have to explain yourself and where you are. You can't just be a transvestite. You have to explain that you're the action transvestite. Yeah. And so it takes a little bit longer to work into that. And part of comedy is vulnerability. And it's kind of a magic trick when you see like this cool, straight guy who should be cool when they're suddenly dropping their guard and being vulnerable and letting you in on their innermost thoughts. There's a magic trick to that. There's a get. And when someone who's already awkward like you, someone who's already a bit of an outsider starts sharing their comedy, it's a bit different. Like, I think Michael Che, his straight machismo helps his comedy in a certain way, and I love his work. Like, he is, like, good for you, being the head writer on SNL. Like, you earned it. But there's part of that success is this kind of, being like the dude.
Yeah.
And then letting the wall down. And I see that when I tour with other funny people. When I go on the road and I'm on a festival circuit, the straight guys have this certain advantage, especially if they are, the handsome, charming straight guys. Because if their act, and almost always their act, is about how they're a nerd like you too.
Well, it's like Chris Hardwick. I mean, I love Chris Hardwick, and I do not for a second doubt his nerd cred. The dude grew up living with Wesley Crusher as a roommate in college, and then before that was like a nerd in chess club.
What?
Oh yeah,
what? How am I just learning this right now?
Yeah, that's why they're such tight buddies. They were roommates when Wesley, or when he was on Next Generation, and I guess Chris Hardwick was
jaw floor.
Yeah, so it's like I think he was doing one of the MTV dating shows that he did back in the day when he was still drinking like a fish. But he was clearly a nerd. The dude played fucking Dungeons and Dragons with Patton Oswalt and that entire
Patton Oswalt. I love him.
Oh, it's the same here. And it's like, so I mean, but now it's like he got his shit together, and it's like it's still genuine. It's who he is, but it's like this is a guy who's like pushing like mid 40s, late 40s, looks the best he's looked in his entire life, married like the granddaughter of the guy that Citizen Kane was based on, like he's got a pretty decent life, drives around in his Jaguar, and it's like hearing him talk about his life struggles as a nerd just feels disingenuous, no matter how much of an honest place it comes from. And I don't begrudge him his success, but then when you see Kumail Nanjiani do basically the same kind of material in his own unique voice because of his different struggles, I saw Kumail when he was in Toronto for last couple of years ago. Some of the funniest comedy that I've ever seen, because he was completely relatable, and he doesn't have that like machismo kind of element where it's like it feels more genuine if you get my drift.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. See, I don't think it's a snobbery between comedians. I think that's something that we have to contend with the audience. Yeah. And if you ever have anything extra that you have to kind of explain, in some ways it's great to have the unique voice, and at other times you really have to take that extra step to explain yourself. Yeah. When I did On Fire, the show that I toured across Canada for like 2 years, I start the show off by giving the audience communion, because they know they're going to go see this gay comedian do a show about like growing up religious, but I really needed them to know that the thing that was other for them was the religion I grew up in and how that religion was affected, because it was the Welch's grape juice and torn up loaf of bread communion. It wasn't the wafer. It wasn't. I wanted people to know that was the specific thing, and then we never really got into like me being gay was just on the face of it, and like you all know a gay person now, so like I knew that the audience coming to see that show all knew what being gay was. I didn't have to explain gay life to them, but I did need to explain religion to them. Yeah. And so it's how you take the time to set that up and what you do, and by making it in my show, by making it interactive, it really worked. The audience wasn't frightened by it. And when I was selling that show, I would have people get like, well, are you trying to convert people, or are you making fun of people who are religious? Because neither of those are cool. And I'm like, well, I know that. I'm not going to do either of those things. Like, well, then how are you doing a show? I literally I had someone be like, you can't do a show about this.
And that seems to be an interesting thing in comedy right now, where it's like, nobody can talk about things to just talk about them. It's you're either for or against. It's like, I mean, Carlin grew up in a very religious Catholic upbringing, and he talks about it, and he's pretty anti-religious in a lot of ways, but he communicates it in such a way that you never go, oh, he hates the church kind of thing. He communicates in a way that's like pulling out just the nature of that being what it is.
Well, and that kind of goes back to the ABCs of love, where we're at this place where you can't talk about anything without it signaling that you're on one side or another. Yeah. Even something as simple as giving someone love advice, the most generic thing that you can do, because everyone has an opinion about how you should date. Even that is very political right now, and we make fun of it as much as we embrace the seriousness of it. In fact, if we didn't do that, it wouldn't be a funny show. Yeah. And the best comedy is like that. Everyone, so much advice is for people to be careful around their comedy right now. There's so much advice about which direction you're punching in, and there's so much advice about who should say what joke. But if you don't really go out there and embrace what you're doing, you're not going to make an impact. I think about like Neil Brennan's special, 3 mics or 3 microphones. Like, what an amazing show! Like, just wow! Like, 5 stars, out of the ballpark, amazing. And what is this show about? It's about how the issues he had with his father not only had never been resolved, but now have zero chance of ever being resolved. And about his lifelong struggle with anxiety and depression. And that's not easy stuff to make jokes about, but he owns it. Unless you own it, you're not going to do anything good. So,
and it's like those dark places are often the best places to plumb for that laugh, because it's cathartic. You're pulling out these everybody has darkness in their life. You're pulling out these pieces of darkness that we can all sort of resonate and identify with, and then going, but isn't this fucking ridiculous?
And it is, and that's the real stuff. That's the stuff. Ha ha ha! It's funny because it's true. No one says that anymore, except for Homer Simpson in reruns. But like, it's if you don't have truth, you don't have comedy. And the funny thing is, being someone who works with clowns a lot, that is the essential part of clowning. Is how you deal with truth in the moment. You can't lie. The minute you start lying, you're not clowning properly. And I think comedians who might see that as a separate training, who might see that as a separate genre, the stand-ups, you got to be true as well. Like, very few punchline comedians have glorious careers that we all envy. Maybe they get to write punch-up scripts for people, but are you excited about Anthony Jeselnik doing anything?
Not really, no. I don't resent him or doing anything, but it's true. I mean, for me, my personal taste is towards the confessional style comedy, like the stuff where it's exploring one's life, like Patton Oswalt's most recent special, or Maria Bamford's last two specials, like where you're dealing with loss or grief or mental health issues in ways that are like just utterly frank, and I think that's it. It's conversations that we need to have, and everybody's afraid, and they're not to belittle people's feelings. I think it is important to be aware of where the joke is going to land, but that should never make somebody afraid to make the joke if their intent is true. If their intent is, I'm trying to make fun of systemic inequalities because, like, me as a white dude, I'm fucking lucky, and isn't that ridiculous? And and that's one of the things that kind of, there's certain artists who did that really well, whose work we can now no longer appreciate because of other horrible things they did. But if you're
being so coy about saying Louis C.K., and he wasn't technically white by American census standards. He was Mexican, which you can be white and Mexican, which is crazy. But according to American, like how they consider race in the States, that makes him a person of color because he is from Mexico. Where in Mexico, I think they don't even actually
they don't qualify it.
Yeah, there is no. I think there's some understanding of indigenous rights, but Mexico's so blended with the indigenous, like the indigenous and the European populations had so many babies together that it's really hard to.
Mexico's an interesting because there's a movement to sort of reclaim the culture by these native communities, but for the most part, you're right, they don't consider race, period. But looking at Louis C.K., where he talks about this, like, much of his early stuff is like, well, he went through a rough period at the beginning, but his best stuff is like, I'm a white dude. This is the best fucking time to be alive, to be a white dude 10 years ago when he was making this joke. And I can go to any point before now in history and still be A1. And he was calling that out in a way that on the surface seemed like, self-congratulatory, but the subtext, and this is what seems to get lost in comedy a lot nowadays, is subtext and context, period, is this is freaking wrong. We shouldn't... Yeah, and it seems like comedy in general, not just Louis C.K., but comedy in general, the context and subtext seem to be concepts that seem to be sliding to the side. Like, Michelle Wolf at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, she makes a joke.
I want to see her in White Horse now.
White Horse, yeah, that would be interesting.
Now that you've said it, I'm imagining what jokes she would tell in White Horse.
I've seen her live. She's an amazing act. But at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, like, she makes fun of, like, eyeshadow, but the joke wasn't about eyeshadow. It was about, it's about lies. And she makes another joke about being like a character in The Handmaid's Tale, and it wasn't about her looking dumpy like the aunt in The Handmaid's Tale. It was about her being a gender traitor, and it's like people like look at the surface. I'm like, the actual joke is 1,000 times more cutting and cruel than this ridiculous surface level that they're obsessed with. And it seems like context and subtext. So you
have some responsibility for interpretation. I think, like, enough people have come to her defense, enough people got the joke, and also Republicans love to create false equivalencies, so it's really hard to take them genuinely about it.
Samantha Bee and the C word, and it's like, oh, for God's sakes.
I mean, Samantha Bee should know that you don't say the C word at work, and Samantha Bee was at work, right? Like,
unless you're English.
I mean, this is why people don't like artists, is because part of being an artist is breaking the rules. And half the time we're the ones who are creating new rules. Like, we're all like, don't say the N-word unless you're in a Quentin Tarantino movie, or 12 Years a Slave. Like, no one gets mad at the white actors who said the N-word in 12 Years a Slave because they were making this great point. But technically they still did it, and they got paid money to do it, which is really wrong on a weird level. And so that's one of the why society has a special disdain for artists, is because we're always kind of breaking the rules, and it's hair thin when that's okay or not okay, and it's really hard to know. And that's why if you really want to be an artist, if you really want to be funny, if you really want to tell stories, if you want to tell jokes, if you want to do any of that stuff, you have to do it first. Step on the rakes. Yeah. But, like, once you've stepped on a rake, if it's breaking your nose, stop stepping on that rake.
Well, it's kind of interesting. You look at, like, we just finished the first season of The Magnificent Mrs. Maisel, which is, it's semi-fictionalized. There's real people in there, and there's not real people in there, but it captures a moment in comedy history where comedy was completely changing its voice, like that late 50s, early 60s in the Hollywood and then New York comedy scene, where basically comedy became what it is today to a certain extent, or at least began that transformation. And you have people like Lenny Bruce, who I don't like Lenny Bruce. I don't like, in a historical context, I can listen to his material and I go, okay, within the context, what he's doing is transgressing. He's trying to push people's buttons and saying things because he's friends with people of color. He's friends with people in the gay community in the 50s and 60s. Like, these are the people he grew up around. And he's obviously, like, when he says these things that to our modern ear sound tone deaf or racist or sexist or homophobic, it's context, and it's like, historically. But if he hadn't pushed those boundaries, then the next voice, like the Carlins and the next generation of comics wouldn't have been able to move past that.
But it's my problem with Jack on Will and Grace, right? Like, I get that it's funny, and I get that I can laugh at it, but I have a hard time when a straight person does, because even though it was meant for everyone, and the whole point of the show was that it succeeded on a broad level. When I was young and starting off in Toronto, as a waiter, people would ask me to perform Jack. People would, like, I would get kind of sexually harassed with this character at work. So, or Lou Reed, Take a Walk on the Wild Side. There's a school that has banned the song, despite the fact that
it was the first person accounts of the life of his friends who are trans individuals in the 1960s.
But the trans individuals at the school were like, I don't want to hear a song about how trans people have to rely on survival prostitution.
I think the interesting thing about that was it wasn't even trans people. It was like it was just people like, I should be offended by this because it's like, okay, but you know the historical context of any of this material. But then there's the added stupidity of the situation was like, yeah, we're doing driving jams on the school road trip, so we're going to throw this on there. And like, it's an awesome song. It's a beautiful song in so many ways, but maybe not the right venue.
Yeah, and so you do have to know your audience. Like, every comedian worth their salt knows there are certain gigs that you do or don't take if you do or don't have that material. You don't go in with your blue material to a corporate gig, right? Like, everybody knows that. So if you don't know how to control for context, and contexts change, and historic things become like, there's all these people who love Grease, all these middle-aged women who think Grease is the greatest musical ever, and they keep getting, like, it's still being done in high schools and junior highs, and it baffles me because it's the most sexist musical.
It's a play about gaslighting, date rape, and just straight up rape at some points.
It's terrible.
It's like
with catchy tunes, though. I love the songs.
Yeah, and those costumes,
But I'm always flabbergasted that Grease has this past because it has so much nostalgia attached to it.
But an interesting counter to that is a play like Rocky Horror, which wears it on its sleeve, and it honestly,
Rocky Horror is a 10 times smarter musical than Grease ever was.
Yeah, and it's like it catches flack, and then like, but you last year you did a play about date rape.
Yeah,
this is just like a person being their true self.
Well, it is literally, if you go and watch the movie and listen to all the lines and pay attention to where it's going, it's actually an ode to hedonism as a life philosophy that pretty much proves its point by the end. Like, it's a very successful. All art has a thesis. It's a very successful film, and one of the reasons that even though the audience at the time didn't quite catch on to what it was, why it lasted for 30 or 40 years or however old Rocky Horror is now, isn't just the amazing performances. Lots of movies with great performances have fallen at the dustbin. Rocky has stayed in the pop cultural zeitgeist because it has this amazing thesis that is still an important thing for people, especially at a certain age, to really question, like, what amount of their life should be dedicated to pleasure. And this is a movie that directly asks that question, like, how much are you letting or not letting pleasure influence the decisions you're making in life?
And then, who gets to define what I consider pleasure?
Yes. And that's an important question, and there's a reason why high school students, when they discover the movie, go ape over it.
We dress up in costumes and watch it in our basements on city TV at midnight when it's for the first time.
Exactly.
On TV.
No. Mommy and me groups don't go off and watch Rocky together for some strange reason. They have a different relationship to pleasure.
The crazy thing is, with Grease, I'd say I'd rather watch. I think Rocky is a much more wholesome message than what's in Grease, and especially when you get into the actual original musical. I mean, they cleaned the fuck out of that movie. They sanitized those lyrics.
Yeah, it's the play, it's one of those few cases where the movie really does make the musical better. Like, Chicago, go see it live on Broadway if you can. It makes that movie look sad. But Grease, if you get a copy of the script, because no high school does the full script. No. Like, they have to edit it too. Yeah. And there's all these extra songs in the script that you need to make everyone's role valid, because in a high school musical, you have to make sure everyone in it feels like they're there for a reason. But it's actually a little bit worse, because in the movie she kind of changes to have friends. Yeah. Where in the play she really only specifically changes to have this one boyfriend who may or may not have, like, failed at rescuing her from drowning. I don't know. Like,
it's a Jacob's Ladder scenario.
Yeah. There is a fan theory that that the entire movie is a fantasy. Like, they actually do die drowning, and the entire movie is their drowning fantasy, like, from the beginning. And that's why the car flies off into heaven at the end, because this was just all a white light fantasy. Right. And, like, what?
Makes for a more interesting movie.
Yeah. Sure. Grease. It's so awful. It's the worst. Except I love all of the songs.
It's catchy as fuck.
It's catchy as fuck.
And back before John Travolta was really freaking weird.
Oh, no, we just didn't know.
Well, okay, he was weird, but he wasn't a Scientologist at that point. I think that's when he met the person who brought him into Scientology. It was his first wife, if I remember correctly.
I mean... And there's things with him and like, his sexual identity that have plagued him, or... like, for his career.
Yeah, I mean...
But the fact that he played Divine...
Yeah, that's what I'm going to say. It's none of my business. He can do and be whatever he wants to do and be. But the fact that you reprise the role made famous by Divine says something about what you like as a person. And I find it kind of sad that he's repressing that element, because he's part of a faith group that considers it wrong. You know, it's like, you know, poor, like, aside from the fact that his son died from completely controllable, treatable epilepsy, which, as an epileptic, that strikes home really hard for me.
Oh, wow.
It's like, yeah, he had seizures, one went way wrong, and his son died, because it's like, how can you, like, compromise you so much? But again, I've never been a person of faith, so that's, I guess, kind of the kinds of things that you touch on in Adam Bailey is on Fire.
I mean, a comedy about a religion that tells you you're going to hell your whole life is once again, dark stuff, and that wraps us back around to that topic. Well, I mean, the show is also about the nostalgia that people who have that troubled relationship, and I know a couple other shows that actually kind of touch on similar topics. I'm not the only person entertaining dealing with this issue of nostalgia for a faith that you're no longer able to be part of. Yeah. Which is a strange thing. When you talk to the atheists in the urban centers, that's a really complex and confusing thing to explain, especially if it's something that technically was hurting you, and people will say to your face, well, that doesn't make any sense. Aren't you just happy to be free of it? Why do you still... Because, like, I personally still believe in a God being thing. Like, I don't try and just say God, because then people just hear the capital G and they hear that word evokes the Sistine Chapel painting, and that's not necessarily what I believe in. It might be closer to the flying spaghetti monster, but it's a hard thing to explain.
It's when there's certain topics that people's minds just shut down around. Religion is kind of one of them. And, you know, when you tell somebody, you know, Carl Sagan was not an agnostic. He was an agnostic. He was not an atheist, because he's like, what greater hubris is there than declaring there is no God? There's no way for us to prove that. I'm a pure scientist. I cannot say something does not exist if I cannot prove that it does. If I can't prove that it doesn't exist. And so, I mean, so he's like, he operated under the belief that there was something out there.
People only closed down around the religious stuff that was the stuff that oppressed them. Like, if I was Jewish and talking about my complex relationship with my faith and how I kind of am on the line with Judaism, we would be having a much different conversation. It would be an easier thing to talk about. everyone has a friend who believes in horoscopes, and we're all pleasant enough to have them tell us why we do things because we're a Pisces or a Capricorn or a Sagittarius, and no one's like, no, don't talk about your crazy star religion. You can't say Sagittarius here. Like, no one's ever been like, don't mention Pisces around Uncle Jed. No one has that reaction to that, but something as complex of Christianity, especially because it's split into so many different factions, and there's damage that we're doing by not talking about it, because there's streams of Calvinism that are woven through the U.S. political system that if you don't really understand how different versions of Protestantism work and how different Christians believe in their faith and what dominionism is, you don't understand why Trump is president or what his electorate, what the people voted for him.
Well, how the Mormons are so easily able to write off things that, I was reading an interesting article about how much of the Mormon support, there's like 61% of Mormons support Trump because he's rolling back land protection laws in Utah that go back to when the Mormons settled that, and they feel the government took away their land. So they feel like he's like almost a messianic figure, and that he's returning these things to him. So every other issue they can ignore because of this one self-serving element. And this is, of course, not a condemnation of all Mormons. There are Mormons who clearly are against Trump. But
Mitt Romney.
Oh, no. He came out and supported Trump recently, now that Trump has endorsed him for Senate again. So he completely backpedaled.
Oh, mother.
Yeah.
So Mitt Romney's father is one of the biggest anti-racists in U.S. history. He actually was the person who called out redlining.
Yeah.
And fought Nixon and fought to make redlining illegal. Like, Mitt Romney's dad is actually this incredibly powerful person who was like very much against racism and wanted to do real work, not just do lip service, but actually like look at what laws support structural racism in the U.S. and tear them down. And it's just heartbreaking that Mitt Romney is such a
boomer. He sold out his morals to get back into power.
Oh, it's really frustrating that generation exists. I'm sorry, Mom and Dad, but your generation sucks. Like,
after the ABCs of Love with Adult Baby Cupid, do you have any plans of what you're like looking to explore next?
Oh God. Oh wow. I'm really focused on the ABCs of Love with Adult Baby Cupid right now. I mean, I would like to direct again soon because it's been a while. I'm obviously focused. I'm focused a lot on what's going to make the Clown Festival really pop in a market like Toronto. That's something that's big for me right now. But just keep writing, keep it funny, keep it true. I am writing a play about condoms and the history of condoms, which is weird and kind of suits me because it jumps all throughout time, space, and history, and so of course it's going to be wacky and not what anyone expects by the time it gets put on. But mostly I'm just trying to make sure that what I'm working on now is good, right? Like I'm a very in the moment.
That's a good way to work. Were there any acts, any comedy shows, programs, clowns, anything that you'd recommend people checking out?
Well, Joe Coy is coming to Toronto for the Just for Laughs 42 series, and Joe Coy is fantastic, and I don't think he's on everybody's radar yet. I saw him in Miami a couple years ago, and he's pretty Peter Pants funny. If this gets aired before the Toronto Fringe, if this has a Toronto market, I would say definitely see the Merkin Sisters. I adore the work that they're doing. I know that there's probably someone else that I should recommend because I saw their work recently and it's just not in my head at the moment. I'm like, yeah, see the Merkin Sisters, they're good, and see who else is funny right now. Gay Victorian Affair on YouTube is pretty funny. And yeah, just go out and see local. Like, I think that's the biggest thing is don't wait for a big name to come to town. There's things happening all the time. And I often just bump into what's local on my own, because if I want to go out, I'm just going to head out the door and be like, I feel like comedy now, and then I'll walk down to wherever the local comedy club is, and I'll just see what's happening. I don't plan a lot of the times. I plan at 2 times a year. I plan really heavily what I'm going to see, and the rest of the year it's very random. So I think people should just go and see local and do local and support who's creating around them, because I bet you there's a local weirdo that's doing amazing work nearby, whoever's listening to this, and the $10 that you give them to watch their weird, hilarious thing will really help them, and maybe they'll end up being some kind of underground thing like I am, because the underground is fun. It's fun being underground. I've been an underground success for a while now, and it's okay. One day I'll stick my head above ground, and then people will see me there too. But maybe this is that moment.
Right. We're star makers. All right, well, thanks very much for sitting down with us.
Thank you.
And Adam Bailey, check him out.
You know how to book flights and hotels. All you're missing is a tool to plan the travel experiences you'll have once you arrive. That's why you need Viator. Book guided tours, excursions, and more in one place. There are over 300,000 travel experiences to choose from, so you can find something for everyone. And Viator offers free cancellation and 24/7 customer support for worry-free travel. Download the Viator app now and use code Viator10 for 10% off your first booking in the app. Find travel experiences for you. Do more with Viator.
Looks like you need a vacation. Enter the 5-Hour Energy Where Will the Tide Take You sweepstakes. You could win a $10,000 dream beach vacation. Imagine jet setting off to a tropical paradise, having fun in the sun, or diving at a gorgeous reef. It's up to you. No purchase necessary. Go to 5HETide.com for official rules and to enter. That's 5HETide.com. Enter today. Ends June 30th, 2024.